Sehr geehrte Damen und Herren, guten Abend und herzlich willkommen zu diesem erstmal außergewöhnlichen Webcast
good evening
Helga Zepp-LaRouche.
To this extraordinary webcast with Helga Zepp-LaRouche.
Von der wir hoffentlich auch in der Zukunft noch einige machen werden.
Before we move into this event, which will hopefully not be the last one, I will say that this is a very drastic period because the war danger has increased a lot. Just for the course of the event, we will have a whole bunch of questions. We already have gotten a lot of questions sent in, and maybe we cannot answer all of those. You do know that the whole event is being translated into English simultaneously, so sometimes there might be a slight delay with the questions because they might have to be translated. For those of you who don't know Helga Zepp-LaRouche, let me introduce her to you. She is the party chairwoman of the Bürgerrechtsbewegung Solidarität, of the German political party, and also head of the Schiller Institute. And she is the person who has made sure that the war danger is known in the world, and also that we have a severe financial economic crisis. Without further ado, I want to introduce Helga Zepp-LaRouche and want to welcome her.
Liebe Zuschauer, ich wende mich heute
Yes, good evening,
Internetadresse
dear
an Sie
viewers.
mit einem Thema,
I'm addressing you today, this evening, on a theme which many of you
sicherlich als großer Schock
certainly
kommen wird.
will receive as a shock.
Pflicht an diese
But I do find it's my duty
Gefahr eines globalen Atomkrieges
bring up this threat of a global nuclear war in such a way.
Kriegsgefahr
Of course, the
Lage im Nahen Osten zu suchen,
global war danger is posed in the Middle East and the Near East.
Eigentlich sofort die Gefahr eines potenziellen globalen thermonuklearen Krieges
the problem, the reality of the danger of a global war coming out of this. And as we can see in Germany and in the United States and in Europe generally, the governments are still not telling the truth to their peoples about the situation. But those who really want to take the trouble to find out about it, they can verify all of this. Over the past days, there's been a sequence of events. On 15th of March, the Israeli newspaper Haaretz had a lead article from the editor of the newspaper, Aleph Ben, who judged that Obama had given the green light to Netanyahu for an attack against Iran. And in this comment, it also came out that the official line since that has come out since Netanyahu was in the United States is that the U.S., at least for the moment, is against such a kind of military action. But this is not the reality, that in fact Netanyahu, who during the AIPAC conference in Washington
aufgehalten hätte de facto die Zusicherung
he was there for that conference, and he would receive the assurance from Obama and others, and from the British Prime Minister Cameron, who was also in Washington at the end. And it says further in this comment that it was similar to in the Israeli foreign policy, that although that Israel may carry out this policy without worrying about opposition.
Krieges von 1967, wo auch die offizielle amerikanische Position gewesen
Just as in 1967, the official policy was that no war should be made against Egypt, but in fact, through secret channels, it was made known that it would be okay after all to bomb Nasser. And Aleph Ben also writes
that
Netanyahu in this way is preparing for a war in this way and is trying to convince the population that the so-called Iranian nuclear program, weapons program, is a danger for Israel, and that there's a danger of a second Holocaust even. And therefore, what would be necessary now, he says, is to according to this line, to make an attack against the nuclear facilities. Now, we should keep in mind that the International Atomic Energy Agency put out a report publicly last November saying that in 1 year Iran would have a nuclear weapon or would be in a position to bury this program so far under the earth that it would no longer be reachable by weapons. And this is completely in contradiction to the estimation of the so-called NIE, National Intelligence Estimate, which is the the umbrella organization for the U.S. intelligence agencies. And they came out in end of 2011, confirming the report of 2007. In other words, that Iran had stopped all nuclear weapons programs since 2003 and had not relaunched them. And the Hans Blix, the ex-IAEA director, said also that this new report was only based on private intelligence agencies and could not be confirmed. Now, the General Dempsey of the United States, the chief of staff, that he also said that Iran is not pursuing a nuclear program. So, given this article in Haaretz, which we have been attempting to confirm with different intelligence sources in the United States, and we could only confirm that during this meeting between Cameron and Obama, or between Netanyahu and Obama, that an attack against the atomic facilities would be about to happen. And the security advisor of Cameron was on a trip to the United States, and he said the argumentation was that Iran had long-range missiles and would be able to continue with that. And this was exactly the argument that was used before the Iraq War, when it was found out that the information was completely manipulated and taken over from were invented practically by the British intelligence agencies. And so this was then taken up further. So now a military attack against Iran and the destabilization of Syria really involve and as targets Russia and China. And the background to it is the collapse of the transatlantic financial system. Because the purpose is to bring Russia and China to capitulate and to accept to help bail out the transatlantic financial system, and by so doing to give up their national sovereignty and to agree to a regime change in Iran. And then what is next on the agenda will be regime change in Moscow and in Peking. So it's already now the case that Israel has the most advanced war material. 2 extra planes to be used for refueling in air, because the distance between Israel and Iran would make that necessary. And they're also getting enhanced bunker busters and also electronic material, for example, to destroy the air defenses of Iran. And then there are also preparations made for rescuing teams in case some of their airplanes are shot down, so that the rescue teams can then get into the Iranian territory to rescue the downed pilots. And this might pass through Azerbaijan. There are also cyber attacks being prepared, as has already been used for programs to infect the Iranian computers with viruses. And these cyber attacks should be able to put out the electrical networks for a period of about 10 hours. For some weeks ago now, before this article in the Haaretz, Leon Panetta, defense minister, said that any attack by Israel on Iran between April and June was very probable. It's Panetta, Dempsey, as well as some active and retired officers, that the war has not broken out as of yet, because these military leaders are trying to prevent a war at any cost. And what we've heard from reliable sources is that there is no guarantee that these officers would be able to refuse an officer if it comes down. But after the visit of Netanyahu in America, what we found out is that an attack might be postponed until after the election in the U.S. But that's really a lie, as we know, because all preparations for such an attack are fully operational. Russia has put out a very clear message in many statements that they are prepared for a war, they're expecting a war, and Mr. Rozarov, the head of the security agency in the Federal Council, it was written in Kommersant that Mr. Solokhov, I believe, said that the Russian Defense Ministry is prepared for a war against Iran and prepared for important streams of refugees who would be coming over the borders of Russia. Or this could also be for resparking old conflicts in some of the areas around Russia. In the program Russia Today of March 15th, the speech is again quoted from the Russian I forgot his name now. But anyway, he said this in the public chamber in December 2008. Makarov was his name, and he said that we could not exclude that conflicts around the perimeter of Russia could transform these regional conflicts into a global conflict, and at that point the use of nuclear weapons could not be excluded. And Mikhail Bogdanov, the vice foreign minister, also warned that the assertion that the Assad government is not legitimate is unacceptable, and that it sends a false signal to the Syrian opposition. and that this would have dire consequences for the region. Then we have a lot of media reporting on the, of course, on the brutality of the Assad regime, but all of the Western governments know that the opposition is being financed by Saudi Arabia, by Qatar, that it includes Al-Qaeda from Iraq, that terrorists were trained in Libya, who are also attempting to topple the Assad government. So there's a lot of hypocrisy and psychological warfare involved in this propaganda. And the truth is that this policy is aimed at regime change, not only for Syria, but elsewhere. And on the U.S. side, there are very open and clearly obvious war preparations going on. The chair, Jonathan Greenett from the Marines, from the Navy, he recently stated in the Senate what the Navy is doing in preparation for a war in Iran. For example, they're sending 4 extra minesweepers into the area. In addition to those warships that are already there, they're sending so and so many helicopters, and they will also meet up with the British minesweepers and work together with them. Then you have the aircraft carrier, U.S. Enterprise, in the Indian Ocean and the Gulf. The USS Carl Vinson, USS John Stennis are also in the Arabian Sea. And right now, USS Pons is being transferred, refitted, so as to be able to join them. Now, you have to realize that these aircraft carriers can handle hundreds of warplanes. They have so many missiles that can operate. There are many nuclear warheads. And faced with this enormous nuclear potential, which is accumulated there has no proportion at all to the so-called task of supporting the Syrian opposition or of waging some strikes on Iran. But it's quite probable that if it does come to war, it will be a nuclear war from the very beginning. And I would mention here a comment in March 14th in UPI from a military strategist, Harlan K. Ullman, who's known as, he was a proponent of the shock and awe operation, or even an architect of it. And he laid out how such a war could develop. So it may well be that it would not come from the west over Iran's air space, but from the north, coming down from Georgia. And Russia has also published similar warnings to that. This Mr. Ullman, he supposes that if Israel really considers Iran as an existential threat, and if it's clear that the weapons are to be buried very deep under the ground, that it would then be possible that it's conceivable that Israel would immediately attack with nuclear weapons. And Israel would have between 80 and 400 nuclear weapons, it's assumed. And Ullman asks, does Israel have no other option? And this is the same assumption, by the way, that was voiced recently by Barry McCaffrey in a briefing where he said that Israel could prepare a preventive nuclear strike. And it was also mentioned by a representative of the Physicians Against Nuclear War, who does not exclude that Israel could launch a nuclear strike because the conventional weapons it has are not sufficient. So this is one aspect of the war danger. Now, Putin, last February, when he met with scientists and military people and strategists in Sarov, in the Russian nuclear center, he practically he had this kind of a discussion with them, and Velikov, who's from the Academy of Sciences and head of an institute, he proposed that Russia's air defense system around Moscow could be equipped with nuclear warheads. That is, to be able to defend against missiles or rockets coming in. And that could be planned, he said. The advantage would be that it's more reliable than missile to missile. And there would be, of course, very serious nuclear fallout on Russian territory, but it would still be less than if more missiles really came onto the Russian territory, that the destruction would not be greater. And this is a warning for the West. And this was considered, of course, totally unacceptable for Europe and for the United States. Now we have to see that we're just on the edge of a development which could lead to the annihilation of humanity. If only 1 to 2% of all of the thermonuclear weapons now existing are actually deployed, the consequences of such strikes and confrontations would put out so much into the atmosphere of dust and that it would become completely dark and the sun rays would not be able to reach the earth. It could go down to below 40 degrees, it is said, for a long period of time. There would be no vegetation, no plants and no animals and plants, and people would simply starve. This would be a kind of nuclear winter which this conflict would have such climatic effects so disastrous that human life would no longer be possible. And this study, or these considerations, were put out in 2008 by Professor Alan Babak of Rutgers and given to the U.S. Senate. And in a very comprehensive study, which anyone can have access to, he investigated when only 50% of the nuclear weapons, for example, of the same size as Hiroshima, that this would create unprecedented climatic consequences. Only 50%, only 50 of them would be sufficient to annihilate humanity. There would be a huge smoke cloud up to the stratosphere, and then through the sun rays and so on, the ozone layer would be destroyed. The industrial facilities would be also destroyed. As we can see. So there are many examples of how we can measure these effects. For example, how much energy would be released and how much would reach the upper atmosphere. In the earthquake of 1906 in San Francisco, for example, or in the bombarding of the cities after the Second World War, Dresden, Tokyo, Nagasaki. And this brings even a seasonal change between summer and winter. And that makes clear that the climate will become cooler. And these all study the effect of lowered solar radiation. Then you will have also measurements over the eruptions of different volcanoes. Here in this case, you had a cloud of sulfur which arose into the atmosphere. And this is an indicator of how such a nuclear explosion could influence. So if we actually get to such a war, we will be confronted with the disappearance of human beings. And this is similar to the confrontation that took place at the time of the extinction of the dinosaurs for about 65 million years ago. When many ex-military and intelligence leaders from Israel say that they are afraid that such an attack in Iran would not only damage Iran, but would destroy the entire region for 100 years to come, then in fact that is only a mild assessment, because the effects could be much, much worse. I mean, this is known by many military people, and I can assure you of that. Those in high-level positions know that we have arrived at such a point, and that is why the Republican Representative Walter Jones in the U.S. wrote a resolution, introduced it into the House a couple of weeks ago, which says that if a president of the United States uses military means without prior authorization from the Congress, then this would be a crime which is impeachable. And this resolution is circulating now everywhere in the United States. It's also been widely reported in media, including in the Hill newspaper in Congress. It's been spread on many blogs in the internet. And it reflects the fact that not only Walter Jones, but many military leaders are aware of the immediate danger of any kind of attack against Syria or Iran. Now, we also have one reason for this action of the resolution was because Defense Minister Panetta said in a Senate hearing about 1 week ago, in a hearing on Syria, he said in response to Senator Sessions, who was asking him how the decision would be made if the administration would go to the Congress in case it was decided to make a war. And Panetta answered that, yes, we would go to NATO, we would go to Russia, we would go to the UN to get permission. And then once we had that, we would go and inform the Congress, and then we would decide whether or not we want to request authorization from the Congress. And this is a complete violation of the Constitution as well as the War Powers Act, because the architects of the U.S. Constitution very consciously put the power to declare war in the hands of the Senate and the Congress, and not of the President alone. And for those people who formulated this Resolution 107, they also use this knowingly, so that in case for use in the case that Israel should attack Iran, but also for a potential military operation against Syria, and also for the over 100 special troops who are acting in the area, and for the use of drones. So all of these actions would be covered by it. Now in Germany, we have only seen a handful of experts up until now, or peace researchers, former diplomats, and so on, who are really alarmed by this situation. Most of the population has no idea of the danger. One small aspect of this did come out to the public, and this is Mr. Ischinger, the head of the Munich Security Conference, who recently had an article in the FAZ about Israel and Iran, where he says that the speech of Mrs. Merkel, which she pronounced, I believe, in 2008 in front of the Knesset, has put us into a dubious position, because she said that the security of Israel is a raison d'etat for Germany as well. So what does that mean in the case that there's an attack against Iran? And therefore, a debate is necessary to discuss this question, because if it comes so far, then Germany will be immediately involved. Then we have a Professor Link, who in a letter to the editor responded that he also brought up the question of a discussion, national discussion, and he thinks that supporting a defensive, any defensive move even, would be against the fundamental law, and that even preparing for such support would be against the Constitution, as well as other proposals from Merkel. So all these people who know what is at stake know that we must prevent this war at any price, because it would lead to the extinction of mankind. So we've come to that point. When the Soviet Union dissolved between 1989 and 91, it would have been possible, given the fact that there was no more adversary in the world, we would have been able to introduce a real order of peace for the 21st century. And that's exactly what our movement proposed at the time, with the productive triangle first, and then with the Eurasian land bridge. That we would take the industrial centers of Europe and link them to the great centers in Eurasia through infrastructure and through industrialization, which would have improved the living conditions for the people in all of the countries involved. And that is the best guarantee for peace. Now, we know that this did not happen, because at the time Bush Sr. and his administration came in and brought in the new neocons who declared the new American century doctrine. The idea that now that the Soviet Union and the Warsaw Pact are gone, we can build up a world empire based on the Anglo-American special relation between Great Britain and the U.S., and that any governments that resisted that policy, that doctrine, would be set up for a regime change. And that was the reason for the first Iraq war. And then during the 8 years of the Clinton administration, it was somewhat pushed back. But then with the arrival of Bush Jr., this policy of the new American century came completely to the fore again with the war in Afghanistan, in Libya, in Iran. And we have now the campaign against Putin and since then against China. As we saw with Senator McCain, who said at the security conference, said very clearly. But if we look at the consequences of such a policy, it is the policy of a dying empire. And this is the most obvious in Afghanistan, where after 30 years of war, of war in Afghanistan, you can see that we ascertain that there is definitely an exhaustion factor setting in, which has caused into question the very existence of Afghanistan, but also of the NATO and the U.S. troops. There are a number of incidents that took place. The Taliban, discussions with the Taliban, the burning of the Quran, which is really the worst barbaric act that could happen, and it just flares up emotions. And now we had this latest incident of a crazed, berserk U.S. soldier who went into the village and killed all of these people, including children and women. And this has probably happened many times. And this has led to acts of revenge and will lead to more. You can imagine when sleeping children are killed, what the reaction is. This is a real descent into barbarity. Viktor Ivanov, who's the head of the drug agency in Russia, recently showed at a conference in Vienna what is happening in Afghanistan with the drug problem, in particular with heroin. 1 million people have died in the last 10.5 years, he said, since the beginning of the operation Enduring Freedom, which was the beginning of the war there, and that since that time, the Afghanistan heroin production has put so and so many $1 billion into the financial system. And the drug production since that time has increased by 40-fold. And Ivanov said that this is leading to a humanitarian catastrophe in all of Eurasia, and also in Afghanistan itself, where 7% of the population are addicts. And a whole generation of children is lost because they're already addicted to opium. And the blood samples from children showed a huge amount, very high amount of opium in the blood. So Afghanistan is a point where really I understand that people in Afghanistan think that their nation is just being destroyed. The exhaustion, the hunger, the drugs, the isolation, fear of the unknown, the constant view of dead people and crippled people has led to a catastrophic situation. And we have to remember that there have been many wars in Afghanistan. And remember that at the time, in the 80s, Zbigniew Brzezinski of the Trilateral Commission proposed to train the Mujahideen to fight against Russia. So the collapse of this society is obvious. And if we think back to how this latest war actually began, what was the origin of it, we think back to the 11th of September. Then NATO passed this resolution on why the attack should take place. And my husband at the time, on the 3rd of January 2000, in a famous radio show with Jack Stockwell, he said he was on this radio show at the very time that the attacks were taking place on September 11th in New York. And he immediately said, my husband said immediately, that this operation could only be possible with cooperation of corrupt elements of the U.S. security apparatus. Because given the conditions of the air defense systems and so on. And he said that that this suspicion was very real. And on 3rd of January, 3 weeks before the Bush administration took power, that it would probably we would probably see a kind of Reichstag fire event taking place, a provocation, because of the collapse of the whole financial situation. They would be tempted to orchestrate some kind of a provocation like the Reichstag fire. And that was already in January 2000. And since then, there are indications. For example, the New York Times just had published an article with statements from Senator Kerry and Graham that the committee to investigate the September 11th should investigate the role of the Saudi Arabian government in the preparation of those attacks and their relations with the so-called pilots, the hijackers. That this was not only, the cover-up was not only done by the Bush administration, but also continued under the Obama administration. So this is also on the agenda now. Now let's look at another failed experiment. Another part of this, the failure of this globalization policy, was the introduction of the euro in the European Union. Now, the giving up of the D-Mark and introducing the euro, as we know, was the price for German reunification. And at the time, Margaret Thatcher, François Mitterrand, George Bush Sr., they wanted Germany to contain itself through the Maastricht Treaty, which basically meant giving up national sovereignty. And we always said, well before the euro was introduced, that it could never function because you cannot take countries with such diverse economic structures as Spain, Portugal, and then highly industrialized countries like Germany and others. And therefore, we said the Eurozone, from the very beginning, could not be a viable economic zone. But especially after the outbreak of the financial crisis in July 2007 and the decision to try and get out of this crisis by bailout packages, well, this only made the situation much, much worse, including for Greece and Spain, because what happened is that the amount of private debt was turned into state debt. And now we're trying to reduce the state debt, public debt, through austerity toward the population. Massive, draconian austerity. And we see the result of this in Greece. After 3.5 years, the situation in Greece is practically on the level of Africa. The health situation is characterized by a tremendous rise in AIDS, but also in malaria, which is a disease which is easy to treat, in fact, is coming back to Greece. The financing of funding for hospitals has gone down dramatically. The medical care, which is covered by the state, has been cut by 40%. You have more people without homes. And you find for the older people also. Unemployment is over 20%, and by young people over 40%, while the unemployment insurance has gone down again by, I think, 20% or so. And this will now go from 200 to 130 euros. And in the same direction, we have the policy in Portugal and Spain and Italy. And now the EU and the heads of state have already decided to, or have already signed the ESM, European Stability Mechanism, which is to set up a permanent bailout mechanism for the banks. And this will be equipped with almost an unlimited amount of liquidity, which means that we're going toward we're rushing headlong into hyperinflation. Now, it's characteristic that Helmut Schlesinger, the ex-head of the Bundesbank, has now published an article in the FAZ where he says that at the moment the ECB is putting into circulation a flood of money such as normally is only seen in wartime, and that this will have very serious consequences for the population. Now, in the entire population of in the entire packet of the EU, you have this so-called debt brake, which means a balanced budget, which has become law. This is the same policy as Brüning had in the beginning of 1930s. And we're going it's taking us into a very, very deep depression at the same time as hyperinflation. So the EU countries are using every shred of sovereignty. The EU is not only a democracy deficit, but it's becoming an outright dictatorship. And it's very open that they have gone beyond the limits set out by the German Constitutional Court in a ruling on the Lisbon Treaty. In other words, they have now given more competence to the European Union than would be allowed. And therefore, we demand explicitly a referendum on this question, because otherwise it would just be such a violation of the Constitution. So we have an unprecedented situation, war danger, dictatorship and fascism in Europe, but also in the United States, because also in America there are incredible, amazing violations of the Constitution that have taken place, and that this is the result, all the result of the attempt to set up an Anglo-American empire.
The war danger is exactly erupting from that type of development, that we have a collapse in the European and transatlantic region, whereas Russia, China and other Asian nations are developing, trying to maintain an oligarchical system which is connected to globalization is as impossible as the trying of the dinosaurs to get out of their extinction. Mankind can only survive in this situation if the oligarchical system is gotten rid of. There is solutions which are very simple to put through. First of all, we need a global Glass-Steagall system in the tradition of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, which means a separation between commercial and investment banks, protecting the commercial banks, but wiping out all the speculative debt. Then next, we need a credit system which creates productive credit for investments in the physical economy, in well-defined projects connected to the rising of the productivity per head and capita, and also raising the energy flux density of the system, which would then create the circumstances for the society to reproduce itself. We need credit agreements between sovereign nation states for these well-defined projects, and then we have to concentrate on the common aims of mankind. Now, what are the common aims of mankind? There is plenty of them. One of the very simple things would be the overcoming of hunger and poverty on the planet. All technologies exist. Within a few years, we could free Africa from the vanity it's in now. We could build infrastructure, dams, we could build cities and use the extremely harvestable regions as a breadbasket for the world. If it would be very simple if the political will could be established. Furthermore, we need long-term security for raw materials and energy safety. And in the evolution of the universe, or the history of evolution shows that mankind and everything else can only survive through the implementation of higher energy flux densities. So that means for us today that the inherently safe nuclear technology of the fourth type, high-temperature reactors on the basis of the thorium cycle have to be established as soon as possible. And then we have to go through nuclear fusion and solve engineering problems concerning matter-antimatter reaction. Another gain or aim should be the development of the Arctic region, where one thing that Vladimir Putin has put on the table is the building of a roofed city, Umka, in the Arctic region, where based on the model of a space station similar to the example of the ISS, a city would be established separated from the very unfriendly environment where scientists and engineers could be able to work. And that would be the model for a similar roofed areas for the settlement on Moon and Mars. If we see that the economic situation on the planet is horrible, then the World Land Bridge would be the next obvious step. The great scientist Kraft Erike, who developed the idea that evolution came from the seas and then through photosynthesis onto the solid ground, said that the next step was then the settlement on the riverbeds, and then through infrastructure, the development of the interior of the continents. And then the next step, through developed infrastructure like rail, we have come to a point today where the full development on the planet through the World Land Bridge projects like the North American water and power lines, a great water infrastructure project for North America into Mexico, the building of the Bering Strait Tunnel, the Eurasian land bridge connecting all of Eurasia with with infrastructure would be the basis. Please show the picture from Afghanistan, how the problem of Afghanistan could be solved. Only if Russia, China, India, Pakistan and Iran would work together and include the whole region, also Syria, Egypt, Palestine and others, as one economic region as part of the Eurasian land bridge, only then could there be hope for this poor nation, Afghanistan. Then we have to go beyond and develop the corridors of the Eurasian land bridge through a tunnel from Italy to Africa and also from over the Strait of Gibraltar, and developing projects like the Trans-Aqua project to develop the African continent, the South Sahara region, greening the deserts and so forth. All things that are absolutely solvable. But another step has to be taken also. My husband, Lyndon LaRouche, has during the last weeks and months with his scientific crew, the so-called basement team, people who are working in the ground floor of his apartment, that the epistemology of the European tradition in the Platonic, Augustinian, and also the tradition of Cusanus says that the creation of the universe has not stopped, but that the universe is developing anti-entropically the whole time, and that means going to higher energy flux densities at all times, going to higher forms of life, and also developing our galaxy as billions of galaxies are still in this process of development. Nicholas of Coos, the inventor of the modern nation state and also of modern physical science, already claimed in the 15th century that there is a coherence between the microcosm, that is the creative thought process of man, and the laws of the macrocosm, which is the laws of the universe. The proof for that is very simple. If an immaterial idea that mankind can newly establish leads to a physical change in the universe, it is the unique capability of mankind through his creative potential to discover universal principles which were not existent before its discovery. But mankind also has the necessity to progress in this type of process. So mankind's creative potential is not voluntary but obligatory. So the guaranteeing of the survival of mankind has to be based on new discoveries of new hypotheses, so that scientific and technological progress is being developed and we understand more and more about the laws of the universe. It is without doubt that we on this planet are living in a galactic process where life on Earth is massively endangered, and we are coming into a phase similar to that 65 million years ago, when the great extinction, the so-called KT extinction, came about. And we are dealing with phenomena today of cyclical processes in our galaxy which are connected to our weather, which lead to heightened solar activities, a heightened cosmic radiation. And we are now faced with scientific problems which bring us into a situation similar to that of the dinosaurs, where mankind is a creative species. We are in a situation where an existential civilizatory crisis of mankind can only be overcome if we take the next step in the evolution of mankind. That means that we have to have an aim of mankind, so that the development of all of mankind is clear, that we'll solve the problems that we are facing now. And the development of space around Earth, the colonization of Moon, Mars and other close planets is the basis for our development of sciences and education generally. So the next step of the evolution of mankind can only be realized as something what Kraft-Erike termed the extraterrestrial imperative, so that only if mankind seriously develops manned space flight, for example, industrializing the moon and colonizing Mars, that we would have to behave rationally, so that the behavior of mankind, of a rational mankind, would be dominating. So we have come to a point where the laws of the universe and the laws of the physical universe have to be brought into the policy making of tomorrow. Mankind can only realize its creative potential if the scientific and technological progress is being connected through the aesthetical education of man. That means that an emphasis has to be made not only on scientific discoveries, but also on poetry, art and music. The capability of man to think in metaphors and to formulate ideas which practically are adequate for the development of progress over the nature of the universe. The capability of shaping metaphors and ideas which are new, thinking something that creates a change in the physical universe before our senses can perceive it. So we are on the edge of a new era. We are in a period which is only comparable to what Nicholas of Coos realized when, at the end of the 14th century, in the 15th century, he realized that he had to think something which had never been thought by any man. And Nicholas of Cus broke apart from the scholastic, from the peripatetic, and developed the Cusa method, which was based on Plato and that tradition, and basically created a new direction for man. So we have gotten to a point where we have to take that next step, and I believe that the new phase of mankind also means that we as mankind have to become more human. This means the development of empathy, which Schiller termed as the most important need of his time already. Mankind has to be obliged to something which Schiller defined as a beautiful soul, seeing the necessity as obligatory and that as real freedom, so that creativity of mankind will be the real identity of mankind. We have come to a development of the universe and a point where if we would think that the mankind has only existed a few seconds in the development of this universe, that if we don't want to be gone 1 second after 12, this next evolutionary step has to be taken, and thereby being the first and so far only known species